We shall fight in the field.
Mit der Akzeptanz der
C'est pas parce que les
vier
Britanniques
Grundfreiheiten und dazu gehört
ont
auch
décidé
die
de sortir qu'ils ne doivent pas être
Freizügigkeit der
associés à ce
Personen.
processus.
Brexit means Brexit.
Hello and welcome to another Brexitometer brought to you by the Martin Center, a mere 2 days after the election that will probably finally make Brexit a reality on the 31st of January. The Conservatives have finally won the majority they've been looking for years, and now the UK is set to ratify the withdrawal agreement and leave the EU formally on the 31st of January. At the center of all of this, the man of the hour is the one and only Alexander Boris de Pfeffel Johnson, the man whose rise to power is intimately intertwined with Brexit itself. Let's remember the day that Boris Johnson announced that he was going to support Leave in the referendum in 2016, in February 2016, the day before an opinion poll had shown Remain ahead by 15 points. 4 years later, Boris is leading the biggest Conservative majority since 1987. So how did we get here? How was the election decided? What do the election results mean for the Conservatives and the other parties? And what do they mean for the future of the EU-UK relationship? In this special end-of-year Christmas election special, the Brexitometer has all the answers. We start with the winners of the day, the Conservative Party, who finally managed to win their majority, the majority they so much wanted. How did they manage to do this? Essentially, Boris was just a better campaigner than Theresa May in 2017. Theresa May as well had the same game plan, the same strategy, to win all those votes in the north of England that have traditionally voted Labour. Some of them have voted a different party than Labour since the 1950s or even the 1930s, by promising Brexit to this working class audience that has always voted Labour, but they also don't like Europe, and they don't like the direction of the economy, and they don't like the new social values of the cities that they feel that Labour now is representing. And Boris managed to do that by winning dozens of seats across the so-called Red Wall, the area in the north of England that Labour used to dominate. What does this mean for the Conservative Party moving forward? The Conservative Party of today is a very different animal to the one led by David Cameron a decade ago. It is much less liberal economically and socially. The Conservative Manifesto had pledged a lot of public spending, quite different from the austerity of the Cameron years. It is much more suspicious of Europe, obviously. It is much more suspicious of immigration. It's going to be much more opportunistic in international affairs. In effect, it's a completely different experiment of centre-right politics, and one that will be observed with lots of interest across Europe, even beyond the question of Brexit. What about the two losers of this election, Labour and the Liberal Democrats? Let's start with the Labour Party, which suffered a crushing defeat. This was first and foremost a personal failure for Jeremy Corbyn, the most unpopular leader of a major political party in the UK, according to opinion polls, perhaps in history. Now, we have to make a distinction here about Labour's programme and Corbyn as a leader. Labour promised a lot of public spending, and we should note that actually its policies were really not that unpopular. After 10 years of austerity, voters really did want some more promises of public spending, and the Conservatives themselves made pledges of public spending. The problem for Labour really was Corbyn. Corbyn was very disliked across many parts of the British society. Middle-class voters feared him because he was too radical, and the traditional working class that used to vote for Labour just didn't like Corbyn's cultural politics. They didn't like his cultural outlook as a representative of what they perceived to be metropolitan London social liberalism. And that basically meant that Corbyn could not satisfy anyone. Where does the future lie for Labour? I think we shouldn't expect Labour to move too much to the centre. As I said, its economic policies are actually not that unpopular. A lot of people expect the state to do more in today's British society. So Labour, I think, will remain a party of high social spending and will remain to the left economically. But it will have to do so under a different leader than Jeremy Corbyn, a leader who is less antagonistic, a leader who is more open to new ideas, and a leader who can really push that message and appear to broader segments of British society. And finally, the Liberal Democrats, the party of the EU, the party of Remain, the party of revoking Brexit. Where do they go from now? The election was really bad for them as well. Their leader didn't manage to be elected in Parliament. The main question for them is, Once Brexit happens and you are the party of Remain, what do you stand for? Are you the party of rejoining the EU? And if you are the party that has always been the party of the center ground, what counts as center ground in today's British politics, where the working class votes for the Conservatives and big parts of the middle class vote for Labour? The Lib Dems also have a lot of soul searching to do. So what does this all mean in practice for Brexit? The UK now has a government, has a leader. Where do we go from here? The first step is the ratification of the withdrawal agreement and the UK finally stopping being a member of the EU on the 31st of January. That's pretty much what's going to happen. And the EU itself was relieved that there is not going to be any more uncertainty regarding the UK's membership of the EU. Step 2 is a bit more interesting, because step 2 is about negotiating the future relationship between the UK and the EU, and formally the two sides only have a deadline until the end of 2020, the end of the transition period. As we've discussed in previous Brexitometers, this is a very tight deadline. It is going to be very complicated negotiations. The two sides will have to agree on things that normally those kinds of agreements take years to complete. So we have to see whether Boris will actually accept extensions in order to keep the negotiations going. There are two possible directions here, and analysts here in London really don't know which of the two. Both appear equally plausible. The one is for Boris to actually use his big majority and the fact that he dominates the Conservative Party to actually continue moving towards the centre, keeping the UK closely aligned to the EU, understanding that there's going to be a lot of economic costs if he tries to move the UK too rush outside of the EU, outside of the European economy, and basically selling all of this as a great victory to his electorate, as he managed to do in the last election. The second scenario actually says that now that Boris has his majority, he's actually emboldened and he can actually afford to play tough ball with the EU. Will he try to move the UK radically in a different direction? Will he try to align the British economy much closer to the US economy than the European economy? Will tough issues like fisheries or environmental standards become the epicentre of tough debates that may lead the two sides close to confrontation again? Will we actually be talking again about a no-deal Brexit at the end of 2020? Really, we'll just have to wait and see. What these elections mean is that all of those difficult decisions really boil down to what one single person decides to do, and that person is Boris Johnson. So that was the post-election Brexitometer, probably the first Brexitometer in the 3 years we've been doing this together, where we actually have a pretty good idea of what comes next. We're probably getting Brexit on the 31st of January, no ifs, no buts, as Boris Johnson used to say during the election campaign, and we finally know who's in charge in the UK, who's in charge in London, and that is Boris Johnson, who is going to be the interlocutor of the EU for quite a few years to come. When the Brexitometer comes back to you, it will be coming to you from a European country, from a country that is very important to the EU, one of the biggest and the most important neighbours of the EU, but not an EU member state anymore. It is a bit strange, but it is a reality we will all have to adapt to. This Brexitometer comes along around a series of milestones. The first milestone is, of course, the election and the fact that Brexit is finally taking shape. Brexit is finally becoming a reality. The second milestone is that it's the last Brexitometer of 2019. So when we meet again, it will be 2020. We're entering the year when Brexit finally becomes a reality. And the third and the most important milestone is that this is the last Brexitometer that takes place under the executive direction of Ioanna Lung, who has been leading lots of the great online content that you've been receiving from the Martin Center, and has been a long time supporter, inspiration and friend of the Brexitometer. The Martin Center will continue providing you with great content on European politics and, of course, Brexit. We will continue monitoring the relationship between the UK and the EU in 2020. Until next time, take care, enjoy your holidays, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and let's all look forward to 2020, the year when Brexit actually becomes a reality. Until then, take care.
We shall fight in the field.
Mit der Akzeptanz der
Décidé pas parce que
vier
les Britanniques
Grundfreiheiten und dazu gehört
ont
auch
décidé
die
de sortir qu'ils ne doivent pas
Freizügigkeit
être
der
associés à ce
Personen.
processus.
Brexit means Brexit.